A couple of things I wanted to share tonight. Actually, Ollie, before we do, the first thing I want to talk about our roll call. So
Sure.
we have a change to the membership tonight. And unfortunately, one of our original 11 committee members is going to be unable to continue to participate. She was really enjoying the process, was really happy with how things were going, but just, everything with COVID, there's a lot going on in people's family lives, and had some things that changed for her, and so she needed to step aside. She's very confident that we've got a great team here. So Allison Aliaga will be stepping aside, and so our first alternate will be getting promoted to being one of the official 11 committee members, and so that's Srikala. So welcome, Srikala. You've already been a very active member, so it's not a big change. It just means that your vote counts now. So that's important. So now I'll move on to my superintendent's report. Superintendent's welcome. I just wanted to thank you once again. I know everybody has too much going on right now, and I value everybody who wants to step up and lead, A, in difficult times, and B, around difficult decisions. And so just know how much I appreciate you and the time that you are giving to us. It's just such an amazing gift. One other change that's going to be occurring at tonight's meeting. We've been doing some research with our legal counsel that supports our board around appropriate non-agenda public comment and appropriate public comment in public meetings that are governed by the Brown Act. And one of the things that we've discovered is that the Brown Act requires us to have public comment relative to the role and responsibility of the committee that is governed by that Brown Act. So in this case, this is a facilities committee that's doing work on facilities, that's doing work on school closure, that's doing work on student enrollment data, things of that nature. So when it comes to non-agenda public comment, those public comments that pertain to the work that this committee is responsible for will be heard. And if you have a public comment about something other than that, we would need to refer you to the board meeting, and the good news is that there's a board meeting next Tuesday night, so there'll be an opportunity for you to share your thoughts and public comment in that meeting. So when people are raising their hand to say, I have a public comment, those people working in the background will be checking to see what it is that anybody that wants to make a public comment about, what topic they want to comment on. And then we will allow them to make a comment if it's about something that's under the purview of this committee. So that's a little bit of a change that has been represented on our agenda, but I wanted to make sure that our committee members knew that and that the public knew that. So with that, one more thank you, and we'll turn it back to Ollie.
All right, thanks, Chris. Moving on to the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second the motion.
And a second?
Yep.
Jennifer, you got that? Okay. So number 4, public comments on the consent agenda.
Oh, sorry, Ollie. Yeah. Can you call for a vote?
Say that again?
We have to call for a vote.
Oh, all in favor for approving the agenda?
Aye.
Those opposed? Abstain? Okay, thank you. Did you get that, Jennifer? Okay. So moving on to public comment on the consent agenda.
So far,
Jennifer?
no, nothing in the chat and nothing by the attendees.
Do we have anything for number 5? Oh, so moving on to number 5 is the approval of the consent agenda, which basically was the minutes of the last meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those?
I'd make a motion to approve.
Do I have a second? Steve? Those in favor? Any noes? Any abstaining? Okay. Jennifer, good? Okay. So number 6, non-agenda public comments. Is there anyone in the queue?
I'm triple checking. No, there's no one in the queue.
Oh, wow. All right.
Any chat and no attendees raising their hands. So,
okay. We'll move on to the staff report, which will be given by Rob Murray again. This one will be a little bit shorter, but I promise you it'll be just as informative. All right, Rob, let's take it away.
All right, so let me go ahead and get that up on the screen for everybody. So just a moment here, then we'll go ahead and, okay, so just checking, is everyone seeing the title slide to the presentation? Wonderful. All right, so last time, if you'll recall, we did a lot of talking about the district-wide demographics and projected enrollment, a little bit on some of the spatial analysis, and I promised that I'd be going into some school-level information and some more on the, let's see here. Okay, so let's see. So, and then more on, pardon me for that, the spatial analysis and also the capacities, because that came up as a question from the committee last time. We have all these projected information, but if we don't compare that to capacities, how much is that telling us? So you'll get the other side of that equation tonight. And then at the very end of this presentation, and that's almost more for reference for the committee going forward, there are some school site summaries that really, I'll go ahead and go through them all, but it's really just condensing and summarizing the information that you've had, putting everything pertinent to a particular school in one place. But the first thing that I would like to do, and okay, this is not working as well as I thought it would, so pardon the awkwardness as I transition slides, but I think we can carry on and get through this reasonably well. But the overview of the Novato Unified Elementary Schools. So as we look at this, and I'll scroll this down a second, so everything, let me go ahead and, I think this is what I had not done. There we go. But you have 8 school boundaries for the elementary schools in Novato USD. One of those, Hamilton Meadow Park, is a K-8 school, but still has an elementary school boundary. So students who live within that boundary are by default would, unless they make some other arrangement, would be assigned to attend Hamilton Meadow Park. You also have, and I want to mention why I'm including this, the charter school, the Novato Charter School, that is also a K-8 facility, which is shown here on the map nearer to Hamilton Meadow Park. And while, again, kind of piggybacking off of Yancey's presentation last week, those enrollments do not affect the district's budget, but the students who attend that charter school are almost entirely coming from within the Novato USD. And so as we look at the comparison of residents to enrollments, it's going to be very important, perhaps, to account for some of these residents who live within a school boundary who are going to a different school. And so that is why we have been looking at those enrollments in the totals that we presented to you last week. So then a quick recap on those enrollment trends. So this is the same projected enrollment that you all saw at last meeting. And I have highlighted there the TK to 5 summary. So looking at the grades that are covered by the district's elementary schools. And again, just to recap, we had a big dip this year. We anticipate a bit of a rebound. And then just due to the size of those cohorts being fairly stable for a few years, elementary enrollment being about the same, but within about 5 years, starting to really see that decrease in total elementary enrollment once again, as continuing smaller cohorts enter the district. And at that point, the last larger cohort that I foresee coming into the district for a while moves out of elementary school, and you have continued smaller cohorts coming in. So what that means at the school level, before I show you those projections, there's a few things that I want to go over. because once you start projecting school by school, you have a lot more that you have to consider. So the first one is that I had mentioned last time, district-wide, we had done that analysis. We had a pretty good handle on, in this year compared to the year before, how many additional students you lost who you would have expected to come back, and how many fewer students you gained than you typically gain in a regular year. So I had that analysis broken down by typically which schools gain or lose those students, and have built those students in by grade level into the school where, when I'm building them back into the district-wide projections, I'm fairly confident that I'm putting them in the correct school based on historical trends. It also came up last time that, yes, you do have the virtual learning academy students. And part of that is making sure that we are, when some of these students transition back to the classroom this upcoming fall, that we are putting them in the right school going forward. Because as you'll see on the next slide, there's a couple of schools that are much more largely affected by this. But the district was able to provide an analysis of DLA students currently in grades K4 who are already showing up in the system as being enrolled in a different school for the next school year. So I've gone ahead and taken those schools out of their current school, or sorry, taken those students out of their current school and put them into the school that it looks like they're going to be in next year. And for at least one school, this definitely, I'm very confident and happy because it completely corrects what had looked like an aberrational low year for them this year. So I'll show you that in just a second. And then just for people who are looking at those totals and comparing them to the district-wide, what I'm showing you on the next slide is just the students who are in these 8 elementary schools plus the Novato Charter School. There are a handful of K-5 students enrolled this year in the Nova Education Center, and I project just a very small single-digit number, but that is why the totals of the sum of these schools is just a little bit less than what you saw in the district-wide projection. That's not an error, it's just that we're not showing the students who are at the Nova Education Center. And finally, just the usual caveat, whenever you have school-level projections, a lot of these schools have special programs, whether that's something like GATE or dual immersion, or whether that is a special education class of some sort. And if there's any district decisions that change those programs or relocate them, obviously that's going to have a big impact on these school level projections. So this projection assumes that whatever special programs there are continue at the same scale and in the same locations. So all that said, we can take a look at these school level enrollment projections. So we have on the left actual enrollment for the last 3 years, which gives us, again, a good sense. If you'll recall from last time, you had in 2019-20 in this district kind of a bumper year with a lot more increased enrollment than you had been seeing for a few years before that. And then in the current year, obviously, some lower enrollment than you had been seeing. And so I had already alluded to this one school. So looking at Lou Sutton, you see just this really drastic drop in this year. And then when we iron out the situation with some of the VOA students who looks like really should have stayed in Lou Sutton and will be back in Lou Sutton, they come back up to very, very close to where they were the year before, in the year before this current year. But on the whole, again, you see that the trend is towards decreasing elementary enrollment. But some schools, and this is largely due to where their cohorts are, because you'll recall when you have a big cohort that leaves and a small cohort that enters, enrollment goes down. But the opposite is also true. You might have a small 5th grade cohort this year and relatively a larger kindergarten cohort coming in at the school level for a couple of years. So a few sites are actually going to see projected enrollment like here at Rancho, that is actually higher for a few years than what had been the case. And this is largely just due to those cohorts that are set to move on to middle school in the next couple of years and the size of the cohorts that are coming in. But when you sum everything up on the whole, we do still see that decreasing enrollment. And so I'll be showing, again, on the school summaries, you'll see one part of that for each school. You'll see at least the 5 years of the enrollment projection. And then if anyone has specific questions on these, once I get through the whole presentation, we can come back to this and dig into some of this a little more if people would like. But this is how I'm breaking out these totals that you've seen before amongst the different schools. And now we get into, again, as it came up at the last meeting, the capacity analysis, because what is it really telling you with projected enrollment if you don't have this piece to look at the same time? And there are a few things that we really need to clear up, because this is one of the sometimes most complex things to talk about. Because unlike when you go to the movie theater and you see this is the capacity of this room, it's not like what the fire marshal does, in that there's not a single number for this. It really depends on a number of decisions that the district can make as to what the capacity of the schools are. The good news for us, at least in this committee, is that at least we're looking at elementary schools, which compared to middle and high schools are a lot more straightforward, in that classes tend to be assigned to a single teacher in a single room and stay there all day. So you have how many rooms you're going to load students into and how many students you're going to load into each room. And that, at the elementary level, essentially gives you the capacity that we're looking at. But even with that, even with just those two variables, there's a lot that we can look at. And so I've given you for each site 3 different capacities to show you different ways that you can approach how many students your facilities can accommodate. And so they're all ultimately based on the NFT contract. And the standard loading is based on the kind of what I would call the default contract language of just with current conditions, how many students a teacher is contracted to take at the most. But the NFT contract also acknowledges conditions under which those loading factors could be higher. And so we have a maximum capacity here that assumes all of those conditions are in effect. And then we have an ideal capacity. I think this is the one that we're going to focus on the rest of the presentation, because this is using that standard capacity and then setting aside 3 additional rooms. And that can be site decisions, but you tend to have a lot of art rooms or music rooms or computer labs, but things that aren't going to be loaded as full-time classrooms that you want to set aside for these other uses. And we definitely want to acknowledge that it's ideal when you can do that and really show you what those capacities look like based on that assumption. And then still more before I start showing you the numbers. But we also need to talk about what we mean when we're loading the available rooms, even when we set aside up to 3 of those. Rooms that currently have SDC classrooms, so special education, special day class, those are loaded at a lower level. So we set those aside and load them at their own level. And then any site that currently has any sort of resource room, RSP, speech, psychology, occupational therapy, any of those rooms, if they're in a full-size classroom, we're going to go ahead and assume that they will stay in that full-size classroom, even though it is quite possible that that could be relocated to somewhere else and free up the room. We're just going to go ahead and assume whatever special education department is using its rooms for, we'll just keep those uses intact and not count those as available classrooms. Some sites have rooms that are classroom size that are used for site admin, for staff rooms, or for libraries. Anywhere that's the case, we're not including those in that initial bank of available rooms. And then same thing, there are a few sites that have county programs operating in some of their classrooms. And same thing, we're not including those as available rooms. So when we get to that, and again, this looks maybe a little daunting at first. I'm going to actually scroll down a little bit here so you can see the standard and the maximum loading that comes from those NFT contracts. So the standard loading, we're doing TK and Kinder rooms and 1st through 3rd grade rooms at 24 students per room, 4th to 5th grade rooms with 28 students per room. SDC at 15. Maximum loading is just a little higher in all those categories, 18 at SDC, TK and Kinder only going up to 25, even at maximum. 1st to 3rd, then up to 28. 4th to 5th, up to 30 students per room. So those are just the assumptions once we know how many available rooms we have of how many students we're putting into them. And then up here, I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but just taking Hamilton Meadow Park, which you see the asterisks there, because this is a K-8 site, we've excluded 7 rooms that are used by the 6th through 8th grade students at that site. We're not even looking at those for the elementary capacity. But we have the total number of classrooms available to the elementary students. We Again, take out the SDC rooms for sites that have them, because those will load at a different rate, as shown in that table below. Whatever RSP rooms, as I defined on the last slide and as in the footnote here, are deducted, and then you have your remaining available classrooms. And then just based on historical enrollments, I'm just looking at, on average, how many TK and kindergarten rooms, how many 1st to 3rd grade rooms, and how many 4th to 5th grade rooms you're going to need to have to allocate between those available rooms. And then those just get multiplied by those loading factors that we talked about. And then that gets you either your standard or your maximum capacity. Then the ideal capacity, as I mentioned, is based on the assumptions of loading and the standard capacity, but we're taking 3 rooms, 2 of them K3 and 1 of them 4-5, which will mean effectively minus 76 from the capacity. And that then gets us to these totals. And now here's where we diverge from where I've been showing you, because I want to include them for the spatial analysis and for looking at students who live in a boundary but are going to the charter school. But the Novato charter school does not load by these standards. And so we know that it is for the TK5 grades, it's going to fill up to about 190 students. But we are now going to set that school off to the side. And so going forward, when I'm comparing enrollments to capacities, I am also going to be deducting the Novato charter enrollment out. So we're still looking at apples to apples. But for the enrollment of these 8 elementary schools, with the capacity of these 8 elementary schools. And so on this next slide, we have this chart, which, so again, this is the moderate projected enrollment, but now we're taking out those approximately 190 students per year that are at the Novato charter school, which had previously been included in the total. And now we see same thing, we hold fairly steady, but starting at 5 years out, we're really going to see declines. And even right now, compared to your ideal capacity, there's already a gap of more than 700 students. And then when you go up to the standard and the maximum capacities that we've identified, that gap only grows more and more pronounced. So why are we looking at this in the first place? And I want to touch on a few points here. The first one is, as shown in last week's presentation by Yancy Hawkins, the district's revenue is based on the number of students it has enrolled. And as has been happening, as enrollment decreases, so does revenue. However, the fixed costs of operating a school stay the same, regardless of how many students are enrolled there. So you're bringing less money per pupil in, but as the enrollment at these schools collectively gets to be less and less, the costs don't go down proportionally. Just the main things that we're talking about as fixed costs here are the need for your principal and other admin, custodian, and the utilities and maintenance on that school. The teachers and the classroom equipment are costs that are assumed will follow the students if they are somewhere else. So we're not considering that as the fixed cost of operating these 8 different school sites. And then just talking with the district, it sounds like there's a pretty steady cost of between $400,000 to $450,000 in these fixed costs of operating a school. And so getting that, if the decision is made to recommend that the district not operate all 8 of these schools, that's the immediate savings that can be realized. And as we've shown with the capacity, any 7 of these 8 schools provide enough capacity at the ideal loading factors to house all current and projected elementary school students for the foreseeable future. Okay, so that is the projected enrollment and the capacities. We mentioned last time that we also need to look at this not in terms exclusively of where students are attending school, but also where they live throughout the district. And this, we don't have the same considerations with the Virtual Learning Academy students, because we're just looking at which boundary these students actually reside within, regardless of what school they're going to, as long as they're enrolled either in NUSD or in the Novato Charter School. And here, you see the same general pattern, and that we had a really low year this year. We expect some bounce back, but the overall trend is still one of fewer students living in the district. And tying that back into our demographics that we showed last time, this is consistent with the trends that we've been seeing, the school age population in the area and the under 5 population in the area, based on census records and reflected in the enrollment of the school district, have continued to decrease over time, and we expect that to continue. But as with the enrollments, it's not going to be equal across all sites. And you can just kind of glance here and see the sites where, or sorry, not the sites, but the boundaries where the number of residents might be increasing a little, might be decreasing more rapidly, or might be holding relatively steady. So again, if people want to come back after the presentation and really look at some of these in more detail, perfectly happy to come back and do that. And then we also looked last time at the spatial analysis, so taking these enrollments and taking these residents and putting them into this matrix. And I know the question came up last time of, since we have some of these issues with the VLA students, how much can we really trust the numbers from this time? I mentioned that I had looked at 2019 as well, and that while there were a few differences here and there, a lot of it was very comparable, and there was certainly no major differences with someone showing up as having majorly negative net migration who was positive the year before. The same broad trends show through both the year when the district experienced its most positive influx of net enrollment in recent years, and in this current year when, due to COVID, there's been the opposite. And so just a quick reminder of how we look at this. So you have schools of residence that are the columns in this. So looking here, this is Linwood. There are 345 students who live in the Linwood boundary. 267 of them are enrolled at, sorry, I got off there. 196 of them are enrolled at Linwood, and then you see the number who are enrolled at all the other different sites. You look across the rows, these are the students who are enrolled at Linwood, and then you can see 12 of them are going to school at Linwood but live in Hamilton Meadow Park. 8 of them live at Loma Verde. So for any combination, you can see what is going on with where students live versus where they go to school. So we have some of that analysis of outflow to other attendance areas. We also look not just at other attendance areas, but then outflow to the Nova Education Center or Novato Charter, and inflow from other districts. Again, at the elementary level, as was discussed last meeting, there's not nearly as many students coming in from out of the district as there are at the high school level, but there are some. And so in migration, when we look at these numbers, this is the percent of a school's enrollment that is coming in from outside the boundary. That includes other attendance areas, that includes the students coming in from out of district. And just looking 25.9% here for Rancho, so just a little over a quarter of the enrollment is coming in from somewhere outside of the Rancho boundary. The out-migration is essentially the inverse of this. Out of all of these residents, in this case 319 in Rancho, 20% of them are going to school somewhere else, whether that's another attendance area or one of these other schools that we're accounting for in this analysis. And then the last one that shows on this is the net migration. And this is really just looking at those 8 attendance boundaries. And this is, so as I mentioned before, this is zero sum. You add all of this together, all the pluses and minuses even out, because we're really looking at between these 8 boundaries, which boundaries on net have more students going out than in, and which ones have more students coming in than going out. And that's where, in this case, you see that Olive and Rancho are the schools that on net have the most students coming in relative to what's outgoing, while Lou Sutton and Linwood are the schools that have the opposite, with more students going out of the boundary to attend somewhere else relative to the number of students who are coming in. And then we just have the same exact matrix for 2019-20. And as I said, some of the numbers are different, but the broad trends of which schools are highly positive or highly negative are consistent. And a lot of the in and out migration numbers are consistent. And on those school summaries that I'll show you at the end of this presentation, you'll see comparisons of the enrollment, actual and projected, resident actual and projected, ideal capacity, and then this in-migration, out-migration, and net migration over the last couple of years. So you'll just have all of that for each school in one place where you can just kind of get a snapshot of what's going on at that school. And so same as with some of the other sections, we're happy to come back and talk about some of this in more detail as committee members and alternates have questions. And that then just brings us to these school site summaries. Again, we don't, this is all information that you've seen, so we're not going to go through all of it again, but it might just be easier to see everything on one screen. But as I just said, you see your actual enrollment and projected enrollment along with the residents so that you can compare. In this case, you really do see that in Hamilton Meadow Park, the resident total tends to be higher than the enrollment at the school. And then with the ideal capacity, the ideal seats available is just the capacity minus the enrollments for each year. And then just a quick summary of in-migration, out-migration, and net migration so that you can see how different they are from year to year. And what you'll really see across the board there is that for these schools in general, even where you did have some effect from VLA students who were shown on paper being enrolled in a school that isn't necessarily the school that they had been to the year before or will be in the year after, there wasn't A, that much of that relative to the size of the district, and B, it really doesn't significantly change the broad trends that we get from the spatial analysis. And then one other note, again, with the net migration, because this is a great example for it, because you see if the residents were so much higher than the enrollments, why is the net migration for this school so close to zero? And that's just reminding that the net migration is only looking at migration between the 8 boundaries, while the in and out migration also factors in out-of-district students and students who are going to Novato Charter or Nova. So that is the distinction that is to be kept in mind there. And then for the rest of this, it is really just the same information for each of the sites. We've included current aerial imagery just for those who aren't familiar with every site, just to get a quick bird's eye view of what the facilities that are available on each campus look like. So for all 8 schools, we have that. Again, Lou Sutton was one of the ones that was most affected with this VLA analysis, but even then, out migration this year close to 40%, the previous year still 32.9%. So again, definitely a difference, but in terms of seeing this school as one that has more out migration than in migration, that trend is consistent across the years. And then just going through more consistency in Linwood, Olive, despite one of those schools that had kind of an adjustment to its enrollment, with a lot of students in VLA enrolled at Olive this year that have are being removed out to be shown in other schools for next year. Still very consistent numbers with its in, out, and net migrations, and fairly consistent over time with its enrollments compared to its residents. And that resident calculation, again, didn't have to worry about the VLA adjustment, and is a whole separate calculation. So it's just reassuring when you see just consistent trends with those 2 numbers. So Pleasant Valley and Rancho and San Ramon. So again, these were largely included in the presentation so that the committee could just have an easy way to, looking at it school by school, compare some of these data points that have previously been presented without having to just flip back and forth between all kinds of different places and writing down numbers and having to keep a lot of things straight. So hopefully that helps depending on what some of the questions are. But with that, that is the data that I wanted to present tonight. I'm sure that there will be some questions, and that's why we wanted to still devote quite a bit of time to this item so that we have lots of time to flesh out some of these details. So Ali, I'll turn things back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Why don't you grab a glass of water? That was a lot of information. So that was kind of by design, that he was going to go a little bit shorter today than he did last time, only because we ran over about 15 minutes last time. And I mean, essentially we have, an hour or maybe a little bit more to discuss whether we should even close a school. That would be my goal today, is if we can make a decision on if we even want to go that direction. We don't have to pick which school and get into that debate. But with the information of student enrollment and this capacity issue, I think we And you guys tell me if we have enough information or do we need more information to at least make a decision on whether we should close the school or not. And I would ask, is there comments or questions? Certainly there must be that Rob can address.
And if everybody could just raise your hand, and then we'll go in the order so that people aren't speaking over each other. So,
And probably a good place to start tonight. Rob just shared a lot of very specific, very detailed information with you all. I'm sure there are some questions about the data. Some of us are really used to looking at data like this, and some of us aren't used to looking at data like this. So maybe a good place to start would just be questions and comments on the data.
Am I good to start?
yep, go ahead.
Thank you. I had a question going back, I believe it was page 19, if you wouldn't mind going, maybe 18. All right. So in regard to Linwood and the influx in and influx out. So Linwood is, and Chris, please correct me if I'm wrong here. Linwood is still in the transition to full Spanish immersion, correct? So only the first couple of grades are the dual immersion, and then 3, 4, and 5 are still regular school.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So Linwood is going through the process to become a TK through 5 dual immersion school. This progression started a few years ago. I believe they're at the 3rd grade this year, and so 4th and 5th grade are an English only strand. Having worked closely on this project from the beginning, what I can say is that some of the outflow is due to families in the Linwood community not wanting their students in a dual immersion school.
Right.
So if you are a TK3 student right now and you say, I don't want to be part of the dual immersion program, you are guaranteed a spot at another school. And so what every parent does is they rate all of the other 7 schools from number 1 to number 7, and then we do sort of a lottery process to get them placed into other schools. So yeah, so they're still continuing that transition.
Okay, so my question really is there any way to take that information into consideration with the kind of these projections of the ins and outs, knowing that there's still 2 more grades that have to transition to Spanish, to dual immersion?
I think when you look at the grade level enrollment at the English only strands and in the dual immersion strands, they're fairly similar.
Okay.
I don't think there's a big difference. So I don't think that would
That's good information.
That would have a big impact. Yeah. No, it's a great question. These are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about.
And could I ask like a part B to that?
Yeah.
while I've got the floor? So then also for Olive, I think it was page 20 or 21 that showed just Olive. So Olive has the GATE program, which I'm assuming is in part responsible for the large in-migration into that school.
I would agree.
Okay. And is there any, like, I know my child isn't old enough yet, but is GATE 3, 4, 5 or just 4, 5?
4, 5.
4, 5. So is there any way to know like what percentage of that in-migration is just for GATE?
So there are 2 classes. There's one 4th grade class and one 5th grade class at Olive. I can't remember which one of the 2 classes is very small. So usually with an upper grade class, you're talking about between 27 and 30 students. One of those classes is very low. It's closer to 20. And then the next, the other one is probably 26 or 27. So there's about 46 students that are in the GATE program is my best guess.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Meg.
Hi. Thanks, Rob. I really appreciate the data, and I think it's very, very clear, and I think it's going to be very helpful in letting us discuss more about the closure of a school. I think that the information regarding the admin fees is overwhelming of what it would save the district in $400,000 to $450,000 a year and having one less school. So that's really interesting. And it seems like the data is really clear and consistent with each year. So I appreciate that. It's going to make our ability to recommend this. And I am feeling fairly clear and positive that it's the right thing to do and to get to this decision to help advise and recommend a closure for this meeting. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Almost, did you have a comment or a question? Sorry, I was on mute. I unmuted myself and then muted again.
Hi. Thank you, Rob, for sharing the wealth of the data. I just have two comments, and it's because I am looking data from a different perspective. My first comment is if we look to the percentage enrollment out of total residing population.
Okay, just at the overall matrix.
Yeah, from this slide, like if we look at the total percentage of the enrollment out of the residing population. And then the another is like, what is the percentage enrollment in the neighborhood school out of the total enrollment?
Okay, so if I meant, so the first question would be just what the overall percentage district-wide is of students who are
so in each school, what is the percentage enrollment out of total residing population? Like if we go from Hamilton, Loma Verde, Lucedon, out of the total residing population in those areas, what is the percentage enrollment? And then the next is like, what is the percentage enrollment in the neighborhood school out of the total enrollment? So we have this information, we just need to reanalyze it, basically, I think.
Right, and yeah, so with the way I'm presenting these, so I think this might, so just looking at Hamilton as the first one, so you have 298 out of the 406 residents are enrolled at Hamilton. So we're looking at that as out-migration of 26.6. If you flip that, the inverse of 73.4 would be then the percentage of the residents who are enrolling at the school. And if it's more helpful to show it that way, we can certainly kind of flip that around to emphasize that part of it instead. But
because when I'm looking at, especially for the Lucedon, and I calculated some of the numbers. So for Lucedon specifically, the percentage enrollment in the neighborhood school out of the total enrollment comes out at 80%.
Right.
Just looking at the enrollment in the neighborhood school out of the total enrollment.
Right, and that's
we can do the same for all other schools, but I did calculate it for the Lucedon, and I think maybe it's somewhere for the other school as well. But right now, what is in front of me is Lucedon.
Yeah, and that would be consistent because it should be 80.2 of the 267 out of 333 if you want to look at it instead of what percent is coming in from another boundary, but what percent of the enrollment are the Lou Sutton residents. It would just be whatever these numbers of in-migration is, the difference of that and 100%, because everyone who isn't in-migrating in is already a resident.
I see, okay.
Okay, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, excuse me, Shrikala. Sorry, I apologize. Shrikala was next.
She's still on mute.
Yes, Shrikala, you're not on mute, but we can't hear you.
Let's come back.
There you are.
Oh.
Oh, I thought so. Maybe that was somebody else.
That was Jennifer.
Okay, Shrikala, maybe we'll do one more while you work on your sound, and then we'll come back to you.
Mary, you're next.
Okay, I just had a quick question regarding the fixed cost. So if we do choose to close the school, I know there's the administrative stuff, but there is a cost still to maintain the campus until a sale of the campus or whatever. So what would that amount be that the district would still have to pay to keep it maintained while it's in flux?
So it depends. And we do have, I should have introduced Laura Fan earlier in this meeting. Laura Fan is our interim assistant superintendent who's filling in while we find Yancey's permanent replacement. I don't think we'll need her for this question, but we might need her for other future questions. So I just want to say that I should have introduced Laura at the beginning during my my update. So it depends on how we use the facility. So if we were to have, there's a lot of different ways we could use the facility. One thing that you always consider doing is looking to see if you have any charter schools using other facilities that would be more interested in using this facility. So one thing we would explore with the Novato Charter School would be, are you interested in moving from the facility you're at in Hamilton over to the facility at, wherever we're closing the school? We could look at using the school for other purposes. We have a lot of childcare centers, for one, kind of scattered around the district in different properties, and it might be better to serve them on one of these campuses. It could be that we could use the campus space for future site for staff housing. So it's really hard to put a cost on that, and we know that there will probably be, we have 1 year, right? So if we make a decision in May, we're not going to implement that decision until August in a year. So we would have about 14 months to figure out how we were going to use that space while a campus was still being used. So I don't think we'd have a long period of time when we didn't know what we were using that facility for and having to maintain it. So I wouldn't say there'd be a significant cost to that. Hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yes.
Carla, I think you got your mic to work? No, we still can't hear you.
Carla, one thing you might want to try doing, and it's worked for me sometimes, is logging out and then logging back in again. Sometimes that helps. So you may want to consider that. We want to hear your question. And if we can't get your sound to work, Srikala, you could also type it into the chat.
Correct.
So we want to make sure we're going to get to you, okay?
Sylvia, you're next.
Yeah, I have a couple comments. First, Ali just said that we are going to have to decide whether we want to close the school at the session or not. My request will be, if we have a specific goal for a certain meeting, it would be nice to know ahead of time for some reason. Just seems more, because I went and looked at the agenda. I didn't see anything saying that we are to decide. I thought just information gathering. Question on page 8. When I'm looking at the school enrollment projection, most of the school look pretty, the numbers are pretty stable. I'm kind of curious about Pleasant Valley. 2019-20, we have 452, and it dropped down to 366. Is there any reason why?
I can certainly speak to that. There are two big things that happened at Pleasant Valley. The first one was that you had a very large 5th grade cohort in 2019 that was 88 students that moved out of Pleasant Valley and into middle school. So no matter what happened in 2020, you were going to have that kind of potential for decreased enrollment, just because it's very unlikely that you're going to have any incoming cohort that's that same size. And then what also happened is that in Pleasant Valley particularly, we saw a particularly small kindergarten enrollment. And we believe that this is the boundary that was most affected by what we looked at last week, where we saw with the private school enrollments that there was obviously a sudden up jump in the level of private kindergarten enrollment. And so that is one reason why the Pleasant Valley is one of the boundaries that has more bounce back. We're assuming that we are building some of those students back in again next year. But really the biggest factor was because I kind of, with my corrected, adjusted numbers, once you account for some of the ins and outs with VLA and with building some students back in who aren't shown in the enrollment numbers this year, but who we expect to get back in future years, is that they're still largely due to that very large fifth grade cohort that was there in 2019. And I'm certainly happy to provide kind of in our FAQ little tables for each school that show the grade by grade enrollments, because that way it's easier to see some of these things since we had the exercise last time and how you look at these cohorts moving kind of down the tables. But just with the cohort that size coming out, there was almost no way that Pleasant Valley enrollment wasn't going to go down. But all the way down to 366, though, a lot of that does seem to be that school in particular having families who took other options than enrolling back in Pleasant Valley this year. And again, we assume that a good, at least some of those. And then the other issue is that even the 2019 fourth grade cohort was also fairly big. So what you're seeing with this 452 to 387, that's about the natural cohort progression rate of two big cohorts coming out and smaller cohorts coming in. And then just in the middle, you have this year where you have this artificially low number that we assume a lot of those students who aren't enrolled in Pleasant Valley this year will be coming back. And we had discussed how we're adding in about half of those students who we observed were short of the expected gain and loss. So hopefully that helps to answer that question. But yes, that is one of the ones I spent a lot of time looking at that number just because it certainly does jump out. But right. I'm pretty confident that the cohort migration explains almost everything that you're seeing there.
Yeah, I am kind of concerned because of this remote learning that we're going to lose some students to private school. And the issue with the student moving out of the district, is that it's easy. Once they move out, it's a little bit harder to get them back, at least through the school year. And the other things, if they have a siblings, they might follow suit. So I think we just need to be very careful with that. How do we attract them to come back to the school if we do lose them? So my other question will be on page 11. Where you have a school capacity versus different classrooms and whatnot. So if you do combine schools, I suppose you can move those SDC rooms and RSP rooms back to whichever school, right? Do you consider combine the program of those special programs for you or not? Or does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, every school will always have at least one resource specialist program classroom. That's the RSP room. Not every campus will have an SDC room. So if we were to close a school that has an SDC program on it, or a GATE program, or a dual immersion program, or any other sort of special program, we would need to make a recommendation for where we thought that program should go. Mm-hmm. Because, I don't think it's within the scope of this community to say, or this committee to say, that we should close a particular program. So if we closed, I'll just look at just the first school with a SDC room. If it was Linwood, we would need to make a determination about where we moved that Linwood special day class program.
Okay, yeah, that's my question here. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sylvia. Good question.
Thanks, Sylvia. Ali, we do have a public comment from one of the attendees. Do you want to bring them up now, or do you want to wait until after the committee?
Sure, they can come in right now.
Okay, one moment. Elizabeth, I'm going to promote you to a panelist. David, Elizabeth, are you here?
There we go. Hi.
timer, please.
Hi.
Oh,
Go ahead.
There we go. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah. we
Okay,
hear
good.
you.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
there I am. Hi. I'm actually the representative from Hamilton. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
hear
go
you.
ahead.
okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm the new representative from Hamilton on this board.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. And I'm having some technical difficulties, so I'm on my phone right now, which I would prefer not to be. But anyway, I had some questions about the school facilities themselves. Is there a great deal of variation between the age of the buildings and the physical capacity of those built, like in terms of how much maintenance or improvement will be needed, as a way of looking at the differences between the properties?
So why don't you go ahead and finish your statement, and then we'll go ahead and do our best to answer your questions.
You didn't hear me?
No, we
Hello?
heard you. I just want to make sure that's your whole statement.
Oh, yeah. I mean, is there any opinion about, well, like if a certain school property is newer or older or more likely to need extensive renovations that would be costly?
Yeah.
Taking that into account.
Yeah. So let me address that. As we're all well aware, Nevada has been very supportive of our public schools through a partial tax and through the Measure G school bond. And so part of the Measure G school bond has been to make sure that all of any deferred maintenance project has been completed and will continue to be completed during the life of the bond. And we've looked at our oldest schools and even our oldest elementary schools, and the two oldest elementary schools that need the most refurbishment are Olive Elementary School and Linwood Elementary School. And both of those are slated to have significant projects completed on them beginning over this summer. Those projects are already in the pipeline. So I think that as we look at our facilities, we should kind of consider them to all be fairly equal, because they will all have all of those things completed on them. So if we could go back in time and do this a couple of years ago, we would have been able to save potentially some of that money. But as it is right now, those projects are pretty far down the pipeline. So all of our schools are going to be in really good shape, which is a great thing.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to now demote you to back to an attendee. Okay, the next person was Steve. You had a question.
Yeah, I do have a question, and I think this is towards Chris. So as a school administrator, we share a lot of staff with other sites, specialists, PE, music, OT, speech, RSP. And I think the question is, if we shut a school, would that be a cost savings to the FTE of those folks because they wouldn't be traveling between our sites as much because there's less sites to travel to? And would that be a significant savings? That's my question.
It's a great question, Steve. Thank you for asking that. I would say it would not be a significant savings, although there would be some savings associated with that. And I guess when I think about our traveling, we have some teachers that are sort of traveling teachers, our elementary PE teachers, our elementary music teachers. And so we do have to pay for that travel time for them to move from one school to another school. But really, I think the difference is just in efficiency more than in actual savings. We're just able to provide more robust programs on a larger campus than we can on a smaller campus. We're just better able to meet the need. So yeah, probably some savings, but just not a significant amount.
Thank you, Steve. Tina has a question or comment.
I have a couple of questions. The first one goes back to the fixed costs. And so if I understand correctly, the savings of 400 to 450,000 excludes teacher and staff costs. Does that mean it also excludes then pensions and benefit costs? Are those completely separate from any of these numbers?
So those would all be included in the cost savings from the principal, the office staff, and the custodian. Would include all the associated costs with having an employee.
Okay, and then the teacher and the teacher costs and equipment and such, that's going to transition to the next school. When I look at the data as it's being presented and based on the previous meeting, my understanding was that there is an ideal capacity for a school facility and that we need to get closer to that ideal capacity because the budget deficit is significant enough that if we don't do this actively, then the district is at risk of, at the very worst, going into receivership. So that in terms of deciding today whether or not the data suggests that at least one school be closed, it seems to me that is what we have to wrestle with, even though nobody really wants to do that, that's not the most desirable outcome would be to get more kids and keep all the schools. But I'm hearing you guys say that is not a potential outcome if we treat the financial data seriously. Is that an accurate understanding?
Yeah, I would say that, of course, we would love to have all of our schools full as they were, 10, 15 years ago. However, that's just as the data that Rob presented to us in our last meeting, that's just not something that's realistic.
Okay.
So now moving forward, we in the 22-23 school year, we're looking at a significant deficit. And we've got to look at the menu of options available to us to reduce. And we just know that in Novato, this has been something that's kind of gotten kicked down the can. This can has gotten kicked down the road for the last 10 years or so, and we're saying we think it might be finally time for us to make this really difficult decision.
Having been here for over 30 years, I can really understand that. My kids went through Novato school, so I know that the district's wrestled with issues relating to funding for a really long time. If I look at the figures that Rob provided for ideal capacity as compared to how many kids are actually in schools and projected to be in them, I'm confused as to why Hamilton's ideal capacity is so much greater than its current population of students as compared to the other schools. If I read the numbers correctly, they're almost 200 under, even as you go across. So, or possibly even more than that. So what I'm trying to understand is there a way to increase the number of students that attend Hamilton? Because it's one of our K-8 campuses, and I know it's slated for a ton of improvements. So if I only look at ideal capacity and if I only look at how much schools are under ideal capacity, I don't know that it addresses all the equity issues and other issues for why you would decide which school to close.
Yeah, I mean, we do have Steve on the call. I know Steve has always worked to increase the enrollment at Hamilton schools, and it's a constant struggle.
Okay.
It's just a big plant. It's a big facility from when it was a big Air Force school. So I'm not sure what more to say about that. The way that you can get more kids onto a campus when there aren't more kids to get on the campus would be to redraw the boundaries. And with Hamilton being so far south, it's kind of hard to do that for them. But it's something we could explore.
Possibly add more programs that would attract people from other parts of Nevada, because I think the tough part with Hamilton is it offers such potential in terms of a facility. Mm-hmm. And when you ask us to consider then if a school were to be closed and a site, say, could be reused for teacher housing, mm-hmm. it brings up a whole other set of considerations in terms of location and neighborhood and access. So it doesn't make sense in terms of looking at this, if we go through the numbers and look at what is ideal capacity and how much under ideal capacity is each campus projected to be, because when I do that list, there's 2 schools that are very close to maintaining ideal capacity, which are San Ramon and Lou Sutton. And then we go from 65 to 70 under all the way up to 200 under. And so I don't want to be oversimplistic, because I think there are social equity issues involved too. For example, unless the program at Linwood could be transferred to another school, there may be parents there who don't have access to the same transportation that parents have in other parts of Novato. So I'm worried about just looking at the numbers and not looking at the circumstances.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I think Mary, you had a question.
I just wanted to clarify. So Ranch Elementary has the early intervention. Is those numbers included in the enrollment numbers? And then are those included in the specialty rooms?
So that's a great question. And I actually have been trying to squeeze that into this. I got a text message from Principal Nam, the principal at Rancho School. So at Rancho School, we have the early intervention program. They use 4 classrooms. So Rob, I'm not sure if that's on your radar, because Rob is looking at kids in grades TK through 8th grade at Hamilton, but typically 5th grade. And these are kids younger than that. It's also really hard to count the number of students for early intervention, because a lot of the kids are on the campus for like a half hour a day, once a week. So, but we should be taking out 4 of those classrooms from Rancho if we haven't done that on the capacity. So I can work with Rob on that offline, but just know that the capacity at Rancho looks a little different than we have on here right now.
Thank you.
Well, at least I can at least confirm the enrollments definitely are only looking at TK through 5th grade. And yes, I know, and yeah, we'll work offline, like you said, Chris. I know I at least was aware of the early intervention there. But yeah, let's just confirm that we've got that fully straightened out, and we can update this slide if we need to.
Yeah, we're committed to get it right, and we appreciate it being pointed out that it's not accurate right now. So happy to work on that. Apologize for not catching that sooner. I could have caught that.
No worries. And then I just had another question for the sites that have the aftercare programs through YMCA. How many sites currently have any kind of program like that? And is that easily movable to another site if deemed to close? I'm sorry, what say specifically the program again? Like the YMCA aftercare programs that are on specific sites? Those would be fairly easy to move. Easy to move, okay.
Great. Meg, you're next.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to circle back with sort of I guess, Ali's mention and sort of goal that was stated. And I think each meeting, I wanted to bring everybody back and just remind everybody about our role as a committee. And that's to review the projected school enrollment and other data provided to determine the amount of surplus space and real property. And so moving away and getting involved into the program details sometimes might get us into the weeds a bit. And, we have really great administrators and staff that are doing that part of things. So really, I just wanted to remind everybody to go back to what our goal is and our role is as the committee members, and also point out that we have 4 meetings left after tonight to be able to get to the decision of what school we're recommending if that's what we decide to do. So just, not to be I guess a reality check here, but I am trying to give a reality check that the data is clear and that it's not going to change. And I really appreciate the work that's gone into that and the work on behalf of the district. But we've got a lot to do in terms of the next 4 meetings to be able to then take a look at what that looks like and what the recommendation to the board is going to be. So I appreciate Tina's comments were just spot on in terms of yes, that looks like where we're going. But I just wanted to bring that back and to support Ali and his stating of the purpose of tonight's meeting.
Thanks, Meg. Shrikala, you're next.
Okay, I'm going to try again with my iPhone. Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. So the good thing is many of my questions were answered. So that's great, But I do have a few questions, at least 2 or 3 that I want to hit if possible. I want to understand if how overflow is handled today. I mean, I get we are sort of under the capacity now, but do you have a process by which you handle overflow? The other is there a state mandate on how many miles a student can travel from home to school?
So Jen, are you aware of any? I'm not aware of any state mandate about how far a child can travel to school, and and I say that based on like knowing, like shoreline, how far they have to.
Being a parent of a shoreline kid, it's and one that attends now Novato High. I mean, there's doesn't seem.
Yeah, but we want to be mindful of that in making this decision, right? I mean, that should be a critical thing that we consider is how far children need to move to go to schools. That's something I believe that if we can minimize the impact of that, that's better for our society. And Shrikal, I'm sorry, I forgot your first question.
The first question was overflow. So it's sort of related question. So if a school has reached a capacity that the max capacity, then can the school say, sorry, I can't accept any more students, and so you'll have to go to another school within the nearby boundaries?
Yeah, we have worked very hard in Novato. I can only speak for the 6 years that I've been here, but I'm sure it was prior to that as well, to make sure that we aren't in that situation with overflow. But there have been a couple of circumstances where we just didn't have space and a family enrolled, and so we gave them sort of the menu of other opportunities available to them and worked with them to try to find the best solution to work for them. So that's what we have tried to do historically. It's only happened, to my knowledge, only 2 or 3 times. And then they also know that as soon as there's a vacancy at their school of residence, then they can just slide back into that vacancy.
Okay. And for, again, the next step, do we get any data around what the maintenance costs per site are? So they, you don't close, if that is the decision that we move to, we don't close a school that is going to have a higher maintenance cost down the line versus something as new as Hamilton. I'm not saying one way or the other, but I'm just giving an example here. Yeah. Do we have that data available?
I'm sure that we could come up with some sort of maintenance factor for a school. It would be fairly similar for all of our schools. Obviously, it'd be a little larger for most of them. Remember that one of the goals of Measure G was to take care of any deferred maintenance type of project. So every school should have should by the end of the bond be painted, should have a good roof, should have a good heating system, a good ventilation, air conditioning system. So all of those things should be in good working order. So, the maintenance, other than the size of the campus, the maintenance shouldn't be particularly different for any of the different campuses.
Okay. And lastly, just a hypothetical question, not that it's going to solve the financial, problems, but I was thinking about if we had to go through a phased manner, can schools go to K to 3 and then 4 to 5 can be combined to a single school?
I'm sorry, say that again.
So K through 3 in schools, and let's say that a school is identified to be closed, and but you want to go through a phased manner, keep K through 3, and then 4 and 5 get combined with another school.
I don't know how that would help us achieve our goal, but
I said it's just purely hypothetical. But if there is any chance.
Yeah, but that could be the recommendation of this committee.
Yeah.
Okay. Ron, I think I apologize. You've been wanting to ask a question for a while and I didn't see you raising your hand. So I think you're next.
That's fine. Rob, thanks again for all of the data. I just wanted to kind of quickly make sure I've got this information correct when I look at the data. The slides, slide 8 and slide 11 were a couple of key slides when I was stepping back and looking at what we're going to be talking about tonight. So if I understand it correctly, the enrollment today and over the next few years is going to be around 3,000 or slightly more, heading towards around 3,000, slightly less. And if we go to slide 11, where we have the 3 capacities, so I think if I understand this correctly, we're currently at around 700 students shy of ideal capacity, 1,300 students shy of standard capacity, and 1,800 students shy of maximum capacity. Do I have that that big picture accurate?
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that you've said so far.
Okay, no, that's right, because I'm getting back to what our goal is or what our assignment is about whether there should be a decision made about a school closure. I just wanted to make sure I was reading those 2 slides correctly in terms of what our mission is. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Ali, I think you're next.
Going back to what Elizabeth mentioned and what Chris was mentioning earlier about Linwood and Olive, if we're about to put in big money into those schools this summer, do we have some kind of crystal ball that tells us that a developer isn't going to point to one of those schools and say, we want teacher housing here, when all of a sudden we just put X amount of thousands of millions of dollars there and we just wasted it? Is there a way to get ahead of ourselves on that and know how to prevent something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have worked with developers over the last few years to look at all of our district properties to see what, given the current status of the properties, where their preferred building sites would be, and they are not any of our existing schools that we would be considering for closure. So. And then there's been some recent changes to even federal guidelines about building that make some opportunities more available to us. So I think there are probably 4 or 5 different sites ahead of any of our active elementary school sites when it comes to the best places for teacher staff housing. I see an educational purpose for any of the school that we choose to close. But of course, I'm reading the tea leaves. So, that is my reading the tea leaves belief.
We have about a half an hour left. Is it a good idea to just take a kind of a tally on who still thinks we need more information? Or do we think already? Does everybody already think that we should close the school? I think it'd be a good point to at least get an idea. Jennifer, is there a way to do that?
I had one question before we go there really quick.
Sure.
If you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, hold on one second. We do have a few people sorry, Mary, to cut you off. We do have a couple people. I think Betsy's been waiting for some time to make a comment. And then we had almost put a comment in the, your question was answered. Okay, Betsy.
No, I would actually like to clarify something, that in the ideal capacity before I can kind of try to make an educated decision of whether or not I think that's a good idea, I think that, you know, I am a teacher background, and I've worked in a school that's like maxed out at capacity, and I've worked at a school on the other end where there's space available. And I would like to add that, like, I wouldn't want ever to put a school at maximum capacity. So making that decision, I would like to know a little bit more of what ideal capacity really looks like. I think I know you included some of the programs, but I think there's a lot more that entails an ideal capacity for a school. So I don't know what my question is really.
Well, so I think, Betsy, I hear what you're saying, you know, because like you, I've been a principal at one school that had lots of space that we always found ways to fill, you know, with special little things. And I've been on one campus where I had 700 elementary age kids, and we did not have a single empty classroom to do anything in. You know, it was just packed to the gills. And, you know, we're always going to be committed to making sure that we have a little bit of wiggle room on our campuses. And that's why we're only focusing on the ideal capacity, because it gives us that little bit of wiggle room on all of our campuses. And when you look at the number, you still see that even with our current enrollment, we're 600, I think it's 600 roughly kids below what we need for that. You know, so a little more than 700 below what we need for the ideal capacity. So we're not looking at the maximum capacity. We're not looking at the standard capacity. We're focusing on that ideal capacity to make sure there's a little bit of wiggle room, like you're talking about, because it's no fun when you can't do those things you need to do for your kids because of space. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah. And I did actually just want to, because I think someone else, sorry, I had one more question. There was early childhood development classes on the Linwood campus too that would probably affect those numbers. Is that
I think those are separate. I mean, Rob and I can double check that, but those two, I think those are not district buildings, so I don't think they're counted in those numbers. But we can confirm that for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ollie, back to your question in regards to process. There's 2 additional members have raised their hand in between when you asked to move forward. We can go through each member and ask for them to make a comment in regards to their next step. You know, we can just go down roll call.
We can go through the 2 questions. First, if there's only 2 left.
Perfect. Mary?
Yeah, hopefully mine's quick. I just had a question. If we do choose to close the school, there's already concern from teachers and parents who've had kids in combo classes. Or is this going to create, by closing a school, create more of that? Or I just want to be mindful of that, because I know it has been a pain point for some of the kids, for the parents, and the teachers. So I just feel like if closing a school, you could even see more of that coming too.
Actually, a benefit of closing schools should be less combination classes. Larger schools, like if you look at San Ramon, you look at the number of combination classes they have there, it's typically far fewer. It's our largest school, typically has far fewer combination classes. The larger a school gets, the more likely the numbers are to work out. Okay. The smaller a school gets, the more likely you have to have combos.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, first, that would be there. You know, this is a hard thing, but that would be one of the positive outcomes, typically.
Oh. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sylvia, you're next.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of clarify about this idea of capacity. I see on page 10, you talk about standard capacity is for federal, whatever, teachers, NFT contract for all available and the maximum idea. So down there, we can see the standard and maximum idea. So are we talking about all these numbers are acceptable by NFT? When you go all the way to the maximum, as well question about the class size, relatively to the capacity, the 3 different categories.
Yeah, I mean, these are the three things that we could do legally, technically. You know, NFT wouldn't like it. We wouldn't like it if we were at that maximum number, or even if we were getting close to that standard number would be hard. But the ideal number is something that should be very achievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So all right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Ali, there are no more hands raised. If you'd like to just have me do a roll call and we can go through everyone and they can voice a comment or next step, however you like.
Yeah. Do you have the roll call sheet and we can just go through all 11 of us and cast a vote?
Yeah. Do we want to put a motion on the table?
Well, I'd say there's a couple of different ways. Let's just think process-wise through this. You know, we've had a lot of debate. We've looked at a lot of numbers. We've asked a lot of questions. We've made a lot of comments. Typically, like in a board meeting, typically staff would have made a recommendation, and the recommendation, if I were to be making a recommendation right now as staff, which I'm not, it would be that. I would make a recommendation that we move to close an elementary school to be named later. Given that this is a different process and I'm not a participating member of this committee, I think it probably makes the most sense for a member to make a motion to close that this committee is going to move towards closing an elementary school to be named later, and then the committee votes on that. You know, we should make sure that we've answered all the questions and heard all the comments in advance of that before somebody makes that motion, or a different motion. So, you know, I think process-wise that probably makes the most sense, but I'll really leave that to the committee. What are your thoughts, Ali?
If nobody has any more questions, I think, I don't know, there's no way to do an anonymous polling, so we just kind of go down 1 through 11 and see what everybody thinks, and have any, you know, last minute comments or thoughts that if we need more information, or if we don't, or if you're already set on one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I'm not a real big fan of the kind of going through and putting everybody on the spot outside of having to raise their hand and vote. So you know, okay. I think once we've gone through the questions and comments, I mean, my suggestion would just be to see if anybody has a motion to make and see if it gets a second, and then see if it gets approved.
Okay.
With that, I mean, maybe one last chance for folks to ask questions or make comments before you ask if there's a motion.
Go ahead, Betsy, raise your hand first.
Hit the mute.
Yeah, me, right?
No, I had
No, Betsy.
Oh, who? Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
And then sorry about that. I was just gonna say, I feel like before I have like a definitive vote to whether or not to close the school, I don't know, that feels pretty definitive for me. And before I would make that decision, I would need to know more of like, what would our plan look like, versus just let's close a school to me. So I'm not feeling quite there yet. And so, you know, if we can discuss a little bit more of like what is that solution look like, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so let me take a swing, Betsy, at trying to talk the group through the basics of what the school closure would look like. So this committee would make a specific recommendation in May about what school would be closed. The board would take action on that recommendation. They could choose to accept the recommendation, do something different, or not accept that recommendation and not close the school. Then what would happen is we would start outreach we would have a lot of work to do in between. So that's why we're making sure we have between May and the August, in more than a year from then, we would need to be looking at the school attendance boundaries and adjusting the attendance boundaries so that we can determine which children will be going to which schools. And then we'll need to spend a lot of time building those relationships between the current school and the new school, so that when kids end up moving to their new school, that they feel like they already have a relationship there, that they're already going to be warmly embraced there. We need to make sure that we're taking care of all the facilities needs at the receiving schools to make sure that they have the desks and they have, all that. Then at the same time, we're working with our staff, because we've got to be really thoughtful about our staff. And, a lot of these staff members have been on these campuses for a long time. That's their work home, that's their family. And so we got to work with them on the transfer side of finding new homes for these teachers. And then come, the end of that second school year, we're really working hard to build those bridges between the child and the new school. The new school's already. And then when the school year starts, we're doing all those welcoming things to bring those new families into the warm embrace of the new school that they're going to be attending. So, lots of work to do to make that happen. And that's why we're really committed to learning from the Hill experience. One of the things that I hear about the Hill closure process was that it was the right decision, but it got rushed. And there were a lot of hurt feelings. There were a lot of things that didn't happen in advance to make that transition successful, or as successful as it could have been. And we want to learn from that. We want to do better this time, and we're really committed to doing better. So that's the best quick overview I can give you of what we need to do to make this happen thoughtfully.
All right. Jen, I think you were next.
Hi. So I just wanted to make a comment. I was on the last committee, and my heart is just racing right now because the decision, knowing that the data hasn't really changed, the numbers have not changed. It's been going as they said during the last committee that I was on when it was discussing about school closure. I'm shaking right now over making this decision, but for me personally, I think it's this decision we need to make is, yes, we do need to close the school. And it just breaks my heart. But the numbers have not changed since the last committee. And that was 3 years ago, Chris?
Yep.
Yeah. So there's my input. It needs to be done.
Thank you.
Sylvia was next.
Okay. So thank you. I think if you're just looking at numbers of students and how many should be in one school, and we can see that we are down number about 900. And per school, we have 2, 3, or 4, whatever, much lower. So you basically look like if we just look at numbers, yes, we should close the school. But I'm more like Jennifer, I kind of know that if I get into this committee, half the community will not be happy because nobody wants to close schools. So I understand that's what I'm getting myself into. I was wondering, is it possible to have a vote and saying that if we do choose to close the school, the motion will be to bring back a little bit definite memo or write-up about what closing a school really means. Rather than, I know, Chris, you just say everything about, what we're going to do, this and that, and actually vote on that next time after we read it. So basically what I'm trying to say is perhaps instead of voting on the fact that we are going to close the school and that's it, But rather than say that we decided the direction of this committee to look into the direction, now that we look at all the general data and the information, we just look at numbers, yes, close to school, but kind of bring back a little bit more detail on what that really means to us. And then perhaps we'll feel much more comfortable and actually saying, yeah, okay, if this is what you're going to do, yeah, then that's what we're going to go forward one way or the other. I don't know if I'm making sense, but.
No, I think it makes sense. Part of what has gotten Novato to where they are is these decisions that continue to kind of put off us having to make this hard decision. And at some point, I think as a district, we need to move forward. And so the committee could decide tonight that we want to do something like that, or they can consider that tonight is the time to make that hard decision. So it'll be up to the committee to see how that goes. Thank you, Sylvia. I appreciate the thoughtfulness. This is really hard.
Meg, you had raised your hand, or do you still have a comment?
Oh, I was saying I can wait until all the other comments are made because I'm prepared to present a proposed motion.
Got it. Okay. Shrikala, you're next.
Yeah, hi. So, yes, everybody has said this. This is a hard decision. But what is different here, and I've been in corporate for over 25 years, so I know I have made these difficult decisions. But what is different here is in corporate world, it's mostly the win for the corporate, but whereas here you need a win-win for the community and the school district. That is the most important thing. While the data is very clear, I don't think anybody will deny that that a school has to be closed. It's really very stark, right? You don't have, and if it was your own house, you would just say, no, I'm going to get away from this situation. So that's how the data is. That's very easy to interpret the data and make the decision, but where everybody is feeling the pressure right now to make that decision is because of that aspect about, are we doing the right thing for the community? So there are a couple things that we have not yet seen data or talked about, probably that is coming in the next round. One I have already talked about is the maintainability of the school assets. There are two others that I want to bring up is the special ed programs in each school. How are they? And once we, make a decision or even agree to certain things about school closure, we definitely need to have these information. What special ed programs are available in each schools, and closing school, what does it do? The other aspect is the diversity or the ethnicity around, right? So, closing a school should not make, one school more out of balance in terms of diversity or ethnicity. So that's another thing that we have not looked at, so that we don't create a different kind of problem. And again, back to my original win-win is what we have to shoot for at the end of this exercise. And obviously, as Chris, you rightly said, execution is the last aspect of it, right? So that has to be done well so that the community is able to, go through this change and adopt that change. So here is my offer, and can be taken one way or the other. But at least if we can, take the next 2 weeks with a hypothesis that yes, the school has to be closed instead of a decision. I think everybody is a little bit, we just had 2 weeks of data. The first week was more around the process itself, but 2 weeks is when we have seen a lot of data, and then making a decision to close is probably too quick. And so if we went ahead with a hypothesis, again, I'm not denying the data and the conclusion just from the data, but if we took even the approach of a hypothesis and say, let's go ahead and make that hypothesis that a school has to be closed and work towards additional data that would give us more clarity around not just a school closure, but also probably some short list of probable schools that we should be considering. Just throwing it out there.
And here's what I might just pipe in quickly here, just to say that excellent points, and I appreciate always people wanting to talk about data. That's keeps me very happy. But yes, I think if we just in general, regardless of how this process unfolds, but as committee members have data that they would like to see, some of the things like the maintenance cost will not really be my area of expertise, and that will be leaning on the district to provide. But things like the ethnicity data of students and how that breaks out by school, even how that breaks out with the students migrating in and out of certain schools, all data that we have the raw materials for and we can compile and put together for you to see. And especially if by the end of this meeting, we have a list of things that the committee would be interested in seeing, then I can have as much as possible put together for the next meeting. I kind of, as you said, if you can identify things that it would help you to see, and I can provide them, then that's exactly what I'm here to do.
Also, I think an important part of the process is if or when the committee decides to move forward with school closure, then we start running scenarios. And we spoke about that in the first meeting. You'll understand the scenarios for each possibility and how that will impact your community, the boundaries, the facilities, et cetera. So all the points that the committee has brought up tonight are absolutely valid. And it's just going to be diving deeper into those individual schools on, if a decision is made this evening that you want to pursue a school closure.
So is that something that has to be done only after the decision, or can, again, back to my question, can that data be analyzed, the scenarios be looked at with the hypothesis that a school has to be closed? I'm trying to, I'm ready to make a decision today, right? Again, based on the data, but I'm trying to be, bring the committee together to have more data for us to, move towards a better decision that is more consensual.
Yeah, Chris, I can answer that if you'd like. Or I think there's different. You absolutely can build scenarios on each school. It would be very intense because you would, say school A, and then where do those kids go? And then school B, where would those kids go? So you would be looking, and depending if you're doing one or two. So scenario building can be very complex at times, depending if a committee wants to look at every single school, but that absolutely is possible. In past, we've had some selection criteria that helps the committee to narrow down picking a few schools that, meet certain criteria that the committee has come together on. Aging facilities is one, lower population, more capacity. There's a lot of different options. The things that the data-driven facts that Rob has been speaking to, those then we do a matrix and understand how the data is driving specific schools and what are potential for one school over another. That's very formulaic. It's I know that it's a very hard decision you all have and going forward, but that's a way to bring it back to the data. Rob, I don't know if you want to elaborate any more on the data side, but how we've done that.
I would just say, as we transition away from kind of coming into a meeting with a set presentation and more towards kind of a conversational aspect and bringing up points, trying to answer questions as people have ideas. I did hear Srikala, you mentioning about coming up with a short list, and that is where I think it would be helpful both for my ability to be able to have data ready, and as Jennifer was saying, just identifying criteria, and whether it's through formal action tonight or through a hypothesis assumption, but moving ahead of narrowing the focus down just so that, and I think I mentioned this with another question that came up last week, if we are not having to assemble and look at all the data for all the schools, it will certainly be more efficient use of the time that we have together. If we can already have some sort of narrowing down that occurs before we again start really deep diving and coming up with what other data would be helpful for all of you collectively to continue to move forward towards the most specific recommendation that you can make to the board at the end of this process. So I think, long story short, as much as we can to develop that short list and then be specific with how that's developed, I think that will help make the best use of our time.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you. I want to be mindful of time. We want to try to end on time. We may or may not be able to do that, but we got about 12 minutes to go. So if we could move through these last few questions and comments and then see if somebody has a motion, and then we'll see where we go.
All right. Almost was next.
You're on mute.
You're on mute. I'm sorry. There you go.
Yeah, actually, Shrikla made my life easy. She asked many of my questions, which I'm going to ask. So I basically left with only one question. And so basically, I mean, it's really an emotional issue as well. And a lot of emotions is going on at the moment. On the part of the data, we already have a lot of the data. That is so true. But we still missing some of the important data. And I think one of them is the data from the low-income families. If we have that, like how many schools, low-income families are enrolled in each school, that kind of the data will be really helpful, because I think there's a lot going to it. There is mental health issues, so many things. Like it's very disruptive when this happens. So I think we need to be cautious about that. And if we have that data, probably it will be helpful.
So I guess my comment to that would be that I don't know that that data is helpful in deciding whether or not we need to close a school, or whether or not that data is helpful in deciding which school it is that we're going to close. And so I think Rob is committed to getting you the data around ethnicity and socioeconomic status and poverty and English learners, those sorts of data points. And those are critical in our decisions around talking about which school that we close. But I don't think that those data points are essential when it comes to deciding whether or not we need to close a school. But that's just my perspective. That doesn't make it right.
Because that also relates to how many students walk to school rather than drive. So those are the things. Mm-hmm. I know about Hamilton, like they have this whole big, I think, child development or something there associated the building with it, and there are many after school programs which I addressed before. But I think we still need to consider those things, that how easily we're able to transfer those things and how it impacted.
Thank you.
All right, I think Ron, you were next.
Sorry, I think I really like Sylvia's point about what happens with the school if there's a closure, and I think that's really, really important information. And I also, Chris, I really respected, and it was helpful to get your response about the emotions involved, but also the process you go through to whatever school is closed, the sensitivity to the families, those affected parties, how to work with them, redraw boundaries, or perhaps all the things that go into them. So I think both were so important. I really appreciate your question a lot, Sylvia, and I appreciate your response, Chris. And I'm wondering if there's a way, because there's also been a lot of questions dealing with the school maintenance costs, the socioeconomic status of the students, and changes about the boundaries that might be necessary. So I'm wondering if what we could do is get a motion, because we do have the data, a general motion about making a decision tonight on whether or not to close, but then contingent upon that decision that if there's a majority of 11 that say, I think I vote to close the school, a majority of 11 say that, but that there's a requirement that the follow-up, whether it's the next meeting or following one, that we have the data that you mentioned, Sylvia, that talk about what does that mean? I mean, how do you essentially work with the families affected by those schools, and then also include maybe some of the socioeconomic data, or not for each of the schools, say here's the kind of information we need. Will they be able to walk? How's the transportation? And then talk about some of the solutions that come up in the scenario planning, like there could be boundary revisions. So I think what I'm trying to do is say, find out the majority are ready to vote tonight, put it to a vote. If a majority say yes, and if a majority do say yes, then it means coming back with the important data that various parties have raised tonight that they all want to know about, because that really does get to the crux of getting into those eight properties, those 8 schools, and all those families involved. So that's kind of my compromise solution, not a compromise, but let's vote. But knowing this is other important information when it comes to making a decision about one of those 8, if it's one or whatever or none. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah. So
Jen, how many more questions do we have?
We had Nahid had one, and Sylvia.
Can we cap it at those 2?
Yeah.
Please.
So Nihad, then Sylvia.
I can actually just say very quickly that I am in agreement with what Jennifer said wholeheartedly. This is incredibly difficult, and with a lot of what you followed up with, Chris, I just wanted to express that the strength of the NUSD community is what we're pushing for here, and we can't have strength if we are so spread thin. And I think that the numbers have shown, unfortunately, that this is not sustainable, and we need as much time as possible to work towards answering all of these questions about equity and diversity and feasibility in the future meetings. And this actually is the easy part. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, and Sylvia.
Okay, so I just want to make a quick comment that I do agree. My comment is along the line with Ron, who's along the line as me, that hopefully today's motion will be, yes, we do, if we do agree to close the school pending on what the district brings back for the next meeting that we can confirm, that's really what we want to do. So is that what we're saying?
So I think nobody has made a motion yet, but I think what Ron was just really calling out is that if we are to make this motion tonight and this is approved, then he needs to hear a strong commitment from the district and the consultants to make sure that we bring back that data that people are asking for at the next session. The socioeconomic data, the ethnicity data, stuff that is all. This is all relatively easy for us to provide to you so that you have that information at the next meeting so that you can really start getting into the hard part of making this decision, as Nihad says. When it starts to get specific to 1, 2, or 3 schools, that's when it gets really, really hard. And then when we've got to narrow it down to 1 school, it's even harder. So I think part of what that idea is, let's give as much time as we can to that really hard part. And so I think that's what I'm hearing from the group. But Ron, did that kind of capture what you were saying?
Can I add?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I want to add, coming back to your first comment saying, at the beginning of this, you say if it's a normal process, you would have a staff report and saying, we recommend blah, 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 and by doing this. So I think maybe I'm trying to say is to bring back a staff report to confirm our recommendation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that is something
staff
that,
report with, with not just the data, but the process. If we close the school.
that is something we could certainly do.
And well, that's what
if that's what the committee recommends that we do. Yeah.
Actually, I'll make a motion that we vote to decide if we want to close an elementary school. And a part of that motion is with staff to come back with a report and what that means to the process of heading towards a decision of the 8, with the included in the staff report would be the data that was discussed by the members, socioeconomic and potential boundary changes, and maintenance costs per campus. So that's my motion.
Jennifer, did you get all that in the motion?
It's recorded.
Okay.
I'd like to make the motion more simplified, and I'm.
So let's see if somebody seconds Ron's motion. If not, we can try to simplify it.
Anyone to second the motion from Ron?
Oh, I'll second the motion.
Okay, so I want to make sure everybody understands what the motion is. So Ron, I'm going to do my best to capture it. So the motion is that the committee is, the motion is to close, that the committee is going to make a recommendation to the board to close an elementary school that has not yet been named. And along with that motion is that the district and our consultants will bring at the next meeting school-based data about socioeconomic status, ethnicity, English learners. I think that's always an important data point, and the facilities costs. So we'll have to have Laura work on what the costs are associated with the facilities of our different sites. And I think that captures the motion. Does that seem to capture it, Ron and Sylvia?
They also mentioned
we got 2 yeses. So that's the motion that's on the table.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so I think we got a first by Ron and a second by Sylvia.
Oh.
So now you would put it to the members for a vote.
All in favor of closing? Yep.
Now let's keep our hands up so we can really get the count here. Meg, we don't see you. I don't know if you're in favor. No, not in favor. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 votes. 7 votes in favor. Anybody opposed? Okay, so I see Meg opposed, and Mary opposed, and Betsy opposed. And so that gets us to 11, so there shouldn't be anybody abstaining. Okay, so motion passes. We've got some work to do in the meantime. This is work we were planning on doing anyways, but I like that you have officially put us on the record for doing those things. Okay, Ollie?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was emotionally draining, so it's a good time to call it. So we'll adjourn the meeting right at 7:30, and we'll see you again, I think, in 2 weeks on March 24th.
Ollie, that's masterful facilitation. A complex emotional meeting like this and adjourn at the exact moment of time. So guys, I know this is tremendously hard. I know this isn't the work that any of us got into education or parenthood to do. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate the hard work, dedication, the selflessness that you put into helping us make these decisions. I know it's very hard. It's hard for me too. I'm a big believer in all of our public schools. But I know that we'll continue to work through this and be as supportive as we can to you as we navigate this process. So thank you all very much. You have a great night.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.